Milo Yiannopoulos is one of the best-known technology and media commentators in Europe. He is associate editor of the London office of Breitbart. Milo has been called a rising star of the right by The Spectator, the pit bull of tech media in a profile by The Observer, digital media's Citizen Kane by Forbes magazine, and was dubbed the ultimate troll by Fusion. He refers to himself on his Twitter account as the most fabulous supervillain on the internet. Once again, please join me in welcoming to Ann Arbor, Milo Yiannopoulos. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, and with the first opening statement coming from Julie Bindel, please join me in welcoming again Julie Bindel and Milo Yiannopoulos.
We're in a situation now where students can go to university. They come out dumber than when they went in. They are infantilized by safe space and trigger warning culture. The idea that interrogating a new idea, coming into contact with a school of thought or a person that doesn't conform to your prejudices is somehow problematic, that it gives rise to trauma. This evening, there is a safe space at Michigan University to protect the safety and emotional well-being of students from this dangerous faggot and a lesbian with the wrong opinions. That is insane. And the worst bit of this is that universities have started to go along with it. They have started to respect students' points of view when the students claim that they have been emotionally traumatized by different opinions. And the trigger warning and safe space culture has started to take root even in the best institutions in the country. My view on this is that anybody who asks for a safe space or a trigger warning should be immediately expelled. They have demonstrated... They have demonstrated that they are incapable of meeting the requirements of their course. Why are you here? Why are you here if not to discover new ways of looking at the world, to discover thinkers and ideas, history, stuff you never imagined that was possible, to broaden your intellectual horizons? If you're not prepared to do that, go home, leave. Don't be here. Now, it's all very well for Julie to say that, her brand of feminism, and she is right that her brand of feminism is in the majority among ordinary women, is not a threat to free speech. Unfortunately, her brand of feminism is out of fashion, and as a gay man, I can tell you all about fashion and everything. But I will tell you about the fashion and feminism briefly, and we'll get to the good stuff. Today's feminists, and they don't include Julie because they don't like Julie very much. They don't include Germaine Greer because they don't like Germaine Greer very much. They don't include Christina Hoff Sommers because they don't like Christina Hoff Sommers very much. All these women are womening wrong. They don't like any of these people. What they like is a weird, distorted view of the world that cares more about your orientation and your gender than what is in your head. They care more about what you are than what you say. That is profoundly wrong. And it gives rise to some statements from feminists, whether it's masculinity so fragile, kill all white men, I bathe in male tears. And you can occasionally hear rhetoric like that from Julie's generation of feminists, but by and large they've got more of a sense of humor about it, so I don't mind so much. You get the sense with the third wavers that they sort of mean this stuff. And very often, when you hear the rhetoric coming out of whether it's Vox or Gawker or BuzzFeed or Mike or university departments or even in some cases the entertainment industry, we're really left in no doubt that feminism is, as Christina Hoff Sommers says, a sort of female chauvinism. And it's a kind of female chauvinism that knows it can get away with anything. It can get away with lying about men. It can get away with calling men names. It can get away with telling lies about the wage gap, lies about campus rape culture. You're going to hear in this debate a lot of stuff, and we're going to disagree on a lot. And Julie is not a free speech fundamentalist in the way that I am. But one thing that we are united on, I think, is that this particular modern brand of feminism is cancer. In the immortal words of Milo Yiannopoulos. And it's a sort of, it has metastasized on campuses because it has been left unchecked. It has metastasized because nobody ever sat these kids down and said, no, what you're doing is hateful and bigoted and fundamentally sexist. And the worst offense of all is that you bully and deride and ridicule anyone who dares to ask you for evidence. That's the fundamental, that is probably the most characteristic feature of modern feminism. It is why feminism is a colossal threat to free speech everywhere it exists, on campuses and in the media. And it's why the answer to this debate question is yes. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, since you raised it, we'll start with a question about the wage gap. So currently in the U.S., a woman makes on average 79 cents for every dollar the man makes. Now that's the average. That's the average.
It's not even the average.
See? The interesting thing is that pay is close to equal right after you graduate from college among college-educated men and women. That gap widens when men and women hit their mid-30s, which is when people start having kids. So how should we think about this wage gap? Should we put it down to personal choices, or does sex discrimination play a role?
Good. It doesn't surprise me to hear a lesbian skeptical about family values. Since after their relationships start, lesbian bed death sets in, there's barely, look, what you have to understand about the wage gap is that it doesn't, first of all, it doesn't exist. It's based on a misunderstanding between wages and earnings. These are two different words in the dictionary. If you want to look something up, look that up. If you take all of the money that women earn and all of the money that men earn and you do a simple division, yes, you will find that the numbers are different, and that's because women make different life choices. If, however, you start to drill down to pay, you discover that if there is a wage gap at all, it is in favor not of men, but of women under the age of 30, at least in America. You also discover that when you control for women's different life choices, for instance, women tend not to graduate in engineering, and nobody is holding them back from applying for computer science or engineering or physics or any of those subjects. If you believe that there is a patriarchal conspiracy to keep women out of those subjects, you have to explain why there isn't one in veterinary science and biology, where women dominate. You discover that women make different life choices, and sometimes there are uncomfortable and unpopular truths that you have to factor in as an economist to this stuff. Women don't work as hard. Now, that's an unpopular thing to say, but they don't work the same hours as men. They take longer holidays, whether or not they've had babies. And, of course, they have children. And I, as a compassionate person, don't mind building in some things into the tax system and into the way the government works to accommodate that and to reward women for doing, for performing the essential function of our species. But that doesn't mean that private sector employers should pay them when they're not working. Now, to address the point very specifically, you cannot pay a woman and a man differently for doing the same job. That's against the law, and it doesn't happen. There are some cases in which women don't put in the hours it takes to make partner. And when you get to those higher professions, which Julie says she doesn't care about, but she will invoke to win an argument, when you get to those higher levels of employment, sometimes women just don't want to do the 80-hour weeks that men do. Now, part of that is probably biologically rooted. Julie doesn't like biological arguments, but there is very clear evidence that, from the evidence of our bodies, but also brain science, that men and women are different in quite significant cognitive ways. But there's also evidence that even in the most enlightened and equal societies, women stubbornly refuse to make the choices that feminists would like them to. For instance, if you look into emerging economies, you discover that the split between men and women in subjects that lead to very high-paying jobs, whether it's physics or computer science or maths, it's pretty equal in many cases, because those women don't have much of a choice but to just do it, get on with it, and make a living. When you look at societies that are famed for their feminist credentials, that are the most equal places in the world, Sweden, Norway, the West generally, frankly, you discover that a gap opens up, and women stop choosing to do certain subjects when they have the full range of options available to them. And what you discover is something counterintuitive, and it's that when women are more free to make decisions, when women have more options available to them, more money, and better access to the institutions, to education, to the workplace, and they have great access to the workplace. They have better access to the workplace than many men. 2015 Cornell study, yeah, you can look it up, shows that women have a 2-to-1 advantage over men going for jobs, academic jobs in the STEM field. Please do look it up. You discover that women just won't make the choices feminists would like them to. And they don't make those choices because, yeah, unlike radical lesbian feminists, some women want a family and children.
We'd like to move on to a question about affirmative action, but that does not prevent any of you from bringing our guests back to talking about anything that you've heard. So this one's going to be for you, Milo, to begin with. So since the passage of Proposition 2 in 2006, which was advocated by Jennifer Gratz and former Michigan Senator Leon Drolet, I don't actually know how to say that, who is present in the audience. I would say Drolet, but we're not in France.
It sounds Spanish, like with the bulls. Drolet!
Drolet!
She liked that one.
Michigan has prohibited preferred admission based on race. Now, the enrollment, however, of black students has dropped by a third since then to 4.6% of the first-year class in 2012, which is down from nearly 7% in 2008. Yet, black people make up 14% of the state's population, which is a little over their share of the population in the nation as a whole. Our question is, aren't African Americans in the U.S. at a disadvantage in getting a college education, just like the lower-income white males that you've targeted for affirmative action with your scholarship? And we wondered, if it's okay to create scholarships for particular groups, what's wrong with using race-based admissions to making progress towards justice and equality?
Okay, I mean, it's a good question. There's no reason why you shouldn't allocate financial funds, and I started a fund, a scholarship fund, for particular disadvantaged groups. But it's something quite different to gerrymander SAT scores, to give people free intelligence points, pretending that they are smarter than they are. Because it doesn't help those people. When they get to college, they get to university, they discover that without those free SAT points, they begin to struggle. And that is why, which wasn't mentioned in your statistics, black attrition rates are so bad too. Because what you'll find actually in those schools where they do away with race-based favoritism, that the attrition rates of the minorities who do go, when they do away with it, get much, much better. Now, you're not doing anybody any favors by putting them into a course that they're not equipped to complete or not equipped to succeed in. Now, the race question in America is tragic. It's toxic to talk about. It's very complex. And actually, I think that although white middle-class feminists are probably the most privileged group in the history of our civilization, certainly black people in America are not. And some of you will know that I have a vested interest in black men being as successful as possible. Otherwise, I don't get to meet them at the parties I go to. But I think the arguments against affirmative action are compelling, and they are that it serves those students very poorly to pretend that they can complete a course they can't. If there is a problem, as there is in America, a very serious problem with early-stage education of ethnic minorities, terrible quality schools in black areas, that's where you fix things. You improve the quality of teaching. You don't pretend people can deal with a Harvard course they can't.
Do you want to...
Patriarchy, of course, if it exists, paying way more into the system than women do. Women take way more out of the system because they get sick more, they live longer, they have babies. I'm perfectly happy to subsidize well, not your pregnancy, but perfectly happy to subsidize other people's pregnancy, but that is the gift of the patriarchy. The internet on which feminists operate, an invention of men. Men got us to the moon, men get us to the, all of these things, all of the things from which women now benefit, all products of the patriarchy.
I think you're right. It was, after all, Al Gore who invented the internet, right?
Exactly,
yes.
Exactly. Biggest patriarch going. And,
let me just...
And find, I mean, you talk about the patriarchy, what very often is not spoken about, when this is sort of gets waved through by feminists as though it's a sort of, as though it's a given. It's not a given. There are respects in which men have pushed forward civilization in ways that women haven't. But there is also, just as there is, and I agree with you that there is, an ugly underclass of women who suffer, there is an ugly underclass of men who suffer. They are the men who build the roads, the men who are steeplejacks, the men who drive oil trucks, the men who collect refuse from outside your house. Women don't want to do those jobs. They have nothing to say about the gender imbalance in those jobs. And if there is a patriarchy, it isn't doing a very good job of protecting men from the worst jobs in the world.
Well,
and that is why
you set up the system,
97, that is why... And that is one of the reasons that 97% of workplace fatalities are male. It is one of the reasons why I find it very difficult to swallow this patriarchy nonsense when all of the worst jobs in the world are done by men.
That's actually, I did want to ask, what do we mean by the patriarchy today?
Okay.
It's very difficult to believe that.
This is what I mean by patriarchy.
When you think that, 1 in 7 American boys is whacked on Adderall or Ritalin because he's held up to female behavior standards in schools, when you consider, the structural imbalance. I mean, I'm not a men's rights activist. I don't want to start getting on the kind of,
But you're quoting all of their
Well, because they're right.
Because
they're right about it. The reason... I don't particularly like some of the rhetoric that comes out of the men's rights movement, but they do have a point when they say women have been telling us for 30 years to treat them just like they treat men. Well, taunting is how men bond, and if some of the rhetoric from the men's rights movement is unpleasant, it's because they're just saying, all right, if you want us to treat you like we treat our mates, we will. And the talking points that come out of the men's rights movement, I'm sorry to say, are largely correct, and, more important than that, rather than the sort of weird, abstract social science world of patriarchy and male oppression, they're rooted in data. They're rooted in fact. They're rooted in the facts that, boys are thrown on these drugs, that exams have been changed all over the West to suit how women learn better, and the facts that, and the university admissions and graduation criteria I mentioned earlier. If you are going to try to claim that there is still, in the West, now if you were talking about the Middle East, we would have no disagreement whatsoever. If you want to try to claim that in the West, in America today, that women are some kind of oppressed class, you're living on another planet.
Shall we talk
You're
about
describing a world 30 years out of date.
As Julie notes, you do have evidence to back up your claims.
She doesn't like it. She claims that it's fake. She asked you to look it up.
It's not
hope
fake.
You do look it up.
It's not fake. I've looked it up. It's a 2014 study by the Department of Justice. But that study, you know it, that study based its statistics on acts of sexual assault that were reported to the police.
Yes.
Now, a 2015 campus climate study by the University of Michigan found that although 11.4% of the students who were surveyed, and that included men and women, said that they had been kissed, groped, or penetrated without their permission, only 3.9% of those report those experiences to an authority. So that's an interesting and significant disparity. It seems like we have a situation where unwanted contact happens, where people know that it goes on, and people know that few people would be likely to report it as a crime. What's wrong with calling this a culture of sexual assault? Isn't that what a culture is, a set of norms and expectations that you don't have to speak about?
Sure. Well, a couple of things to say on that. The first is that rape rates have been going down for 30 years in the West everywhere. And the second, the second is that see, the left has a problem with all kinds of bigotry and sexual violence, racial violence. They have a supply and demand problem. There are a lot of feminists, and there aren't enough rapes to go around. There are a lot of race hustlers,
I thought you argued
and there isn't enough racism to go around. There are a lot of gay rights activists. There isn't enough homophobia to go around. So what they have to do is they have a couple of strategies. Either you look harder. So in the case of homophobia, you've got scores of journalists calling every pizzeria in the Midwest, desperate to find somebody who says, no, I'd rather not do a lesbian wedding. Yeah, there, guys, we've got one, we've got bigots at last. You know, and then the whole left will all write about this one case.
But I'm not.
So there's a supply and demand problem. The other way to
do
do it, no, you're not. The other way to do it is to widen the definition of the thing you're looking for. Now, you said a moment ago that unwanted sexual conduct, which included kissing, only, what was it, 3.9%. You said people will be not really willing to report that. Not willing to report an unwanted kiss? Well, thank God, the police would never have anything else to do. When you widen the definition of sexual assault, and you use that widened definition, which encompasses ordinary human sexuality, the confusion and fumbling and exploration that is part of growing into your sexual identity at university, and you call all of that sexual assault, which most of the conduct guides and behavior standards guides at universities these days do that. They do. They criminalize ordinary human sexual behavior. And then they, by broadening the definition. When you do that, and then you use it to suggest that it is indicative of some kind of pervasive rape culture, you're making two mistakes. One is you are including things like unwanted kisses. Well, I'm sorry, but I mean, you better lock me up now. Two, you are suggesting that rape exists on a spectrum. You are suggesting that a culture of sexual frisson, who knows, unwanted kissing, how awful. You are suggesting that that somehow exists on a spectrum, the ultimate endpoint of which is rape. That's insane. That's not how rape works. No crime happens like that. It's just not how it works. Rape is a very specific, and Julie knows a lot about this. It's a horrific and specific crime, but it doesn't start with touching the elbow. And so, when you ask the question, is there a rape culture on campus, my only response can be, these campuses where women have been told for 30, 40 years, provided with every possible support network, more and more opening up all the time, encouraged to report the slightest infraction and to call it a microaggression. They have every service available to them now, and yet the rates of real rapes are still going down according to the Department of Justice statistics. The only thing that's really going up is this broadened definition, which is ultimately meaningless, which has criminalized, to use the word loosely, ordinary human sexual interaction. That's wrong. It does not reflect the way that human sexuality evolves, and it does a huge disservice to women, because it tells all women that they are victims of sexual violence just because somebody tried to kiss them or touch their boobs. Who cares? Earlier generations of women would have said, "Get your hands off me." Today's women file a sexual assault claim. Where there is... Julie's been doing this for a long time and has some very harrowing stories, and it's certainly a horrible crime, and one that should be punished very harshly. My suggestion to her, though, is that on campuses, at least, the pendulum has swung a little too far in the other direction. That the definition of sexual assault has been widened, and also, and this is very Orwellian and very worrying, and it should worry everybody in this hall, really, that the judicial system, which has in many cases failed women, is becoming replaced by university kangaroo courts. It's becoming replaced by courts made up of university administrators who determine on sexual assault charges with the lowest possible bar of evidence, called preponderance of the evidence, right? 51% likely he probably did it, right? And that's enough to ruin a man's reputation. Now, there are false rape claims. That one of the problems is the left-wing media. One of the problems is that they are so desperate, and as I said earlier, to find these juicy examples and then spread them far and wide, however implausible they may sound, however unfair they are, that, of course, many of the high-profile ones end up turning out to be nonsense. And indeed, all of the most prominent campus rapes from the last 10 years have turned out to be nonsense. All of them. Whether it's Duke Lacrosse, or Emma Solkowitz at Columbia, or the UVA case. Now, this does a disservice to women, because it means that women aren't believed. And women think, well, if I go and report that something has happened to me, something serious, not an unwanted kiss, but something serious, I might not be believed, because these lying bitches have tried to besmirch the reputation of men and been believed by the press, turned into celebrities, and then it turns out they're fantasists. I want to protect women from that. And I don't want a liberal media that just believes, that listens and believes, which is the great feminist mantra today. Listen and believe. If a woman tells you something, just listen, but just take it. Just take it as gospel. No, I don't.
Well, that doesn't
I don't
happen
take
with
it
rape,
as
that's
gospel.
for sure.
Now, one last thing, Julie mentions, that we don't walk around like special snowflakes, terrified when we go home on the bus. Well, many young girls are being taught to do precisely that. Now, on the one hand, perhaps they should, because the reality of male sexuality is that it is, or at least it can be at some times, dangerous. Now, that's part of what makes it exciting, certainly what I like about it. But it also means that there is a dark side to male sexuality, and the problem with enlarging the definitions of sexual assault, with telling women that, you can wear anything. You can wear anything you want. You go, girl. You do a slut walk in your knickers. No man has the right to look at you. Well, the problem is that the people that you meet at 3 a.m. when you're drunk walking home from the club did not go to a consent class at Brown or Brandeis or the University of Michigan. These are not the people who are going to rape you. These nice, white, middle-class boys who are so petrified of even approaching girls these days, they don't know what the hell to do. They're put in these consent classes where they're told, you're all potential rapists. This is rape culture. Really? I had no idea. I had no idea I was a rapist. Thanks for telling me. What happens to women who are not adequately prepared for the real world because they have been told that somebody touching their boob is a hideous crime for which they must be punished? It's the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. Oh, God, sister, sister. What happens when these women get into the real world is they are in danger of having something really bad happen to them. And that's why I object to the lie that is campus rape culture. It's not a woman's responsibility to, not get raped, but there is obviously a set of consequences that go associated with going out dressed in a provocative manner, drunk, unable to be aware of the dangers around you in certain bits of town at certain times of day. I'm not saying, and I've never said, and nobody I think reasonable person would believe, that a woman is responsible for not getting raped, but women should be educated about which situations are dangerous for them. And I know you don't like biological determinism, which is why you think this sort of bad male behavior has been socialized in. But it isn't just socialization. I don't think it's a bad thing that there is a dark side to male sexuality. Yes, there is a dark side, but there's also a light side. And it's the competitive instinct in men that has meant that we invent everything. And that we, build the pyramids and have been to space and built the internet, and that men did pretty much all the cool stuff that's around you. It's the reason in part why that competitive instinct, that testosterone-fueled male instinct, in part, why men work harder and some of them get paid more. But I want to defend you, and you said the word humorless. If I'd said something like that, people would have laughed it off. The fact that Julie said it and got a lot of nonsense, I think, shows how the modern feminist movement, and in some cases the modern men's rights movement, when they are at their worst, the best ones are great, but some of them, just like feminists, can be awful. Do indulge in this incredible, deliberate, disingenuous humorlessness. Now, when Julie told that story, I think pretty much everybody in here laughed because there was something in there to find that was humorous, but she was also sort of trying to tell her truth or a truth through humor. So just so she's not the only person who has been horrendously bigoted via comedy, I'll tell you my idea. And my idea, well, it's not really my idea because Ann Coulter said this. My idea is that we should remove the vote from women. Now, I'll tell you why. Women vote terribly. They vote really badly. They don't even vote in their own best interests. The parties in Europe that are welcoming in the Islamo-fascists you hate so much, the parties who are welcoming in genuine patriarchies, cultures that do create mass rapes of the kind that have not been seen in Europe since the 1400s. These are left-wing parties overwhelmingly voted into government by women. Those left-wing parties, when they're in power, when they leave, they always seem to report that things are worse for women than when they started. Well, maybe it's time for conservatives to have a go.
Milo,
Now,
there's one problem with your idea, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
My men won't have the vote. Because they'll be in the camps.
I see. Oh, you're one step ahead of me.
We're going to be an autocracy.
Women,
we're going to be a dictatorship.
Women always vote for big government, except they don't want to pay for it because it's men who pay more in taxation. They always vote for more services, but they never want to pay
I thought
in.
men didn't earn more than women. How are they paying?
Well, they pay more in tax. They always want to indulge themselves on the public teat. Women overwhelmingly work in the public sector, whereas men don't. Men overwhelmingly work for themselves. Women are much more likely statistically to work for somebody else. They don't want to put in, but they like to take out. So they vote for terrible policies, and they vote for governments that promise them the world. They vote for progressive governments who just want to do cash giveaways. They vote terribly, and they don't even vote in their own interests. They vote for parties that believe in bringing in 1.2 million Syrian refugees who immediately start rape sprees. So for the sake of women, I would like to reverse suffrage. To protect women from their own bad choices, I would like to remove the... There we go, now we've both done it. So.
Are there questions?
And the camp was all right.
Are there questions?
There's only one kind of camp that's okay.
From the floor.
This one.
We do have a question.
We will do 10 minutes of question and answer.
Oh, come on now. We can do more than that.
How many do you want?
Well, until we get tired. She'll get tired before I do.
No, I'll just be definitely drinking.
Oh.
Yeah, just, we'll get you the wine to the table. You'll be fine. They're such alcoholics.
My question is more of like a cultural phenomenon I've noticed on the internet, and that's between the atheist movements and the atheist plus movements, and I want to know both your opinions on that.
Okay. Well, atheism in any case is sad. I feel sorry for them. I mean, atheists are sort of like feminists. They're the most thin-skinned people on the internet. I did an interview with Dave Rubin, and I said, you know, I love winding up atheists saying how wrong they are because the comment sections are amazing. And the first comment under the video was, "How dare you say we're thin-skinned?" And you know, I mean, I'm Catholic. I know God loves me because although God hates fags, He hates feminists more. So the atheism movement really doesn't interest me that much, but I did enjoy watching it torn apart by social justice warriors. If there's any ladies in the audience, thanks for coming, but I'm going to address this to the men. We live in a, quite aside from anything even remotely resembling a patriarchy, and I've explained some of the reasons I think that concept is preposterous this evening, or at least is simply out of date, probably 30 years out of date. Quite distinct from such a concept. Men live in a very hostile climate. Men live in a world where they do not have free speech, where it is socially disadvantageous and professionally dangerous to discuss things like the campus rape culture myth or the wage gap, or indeed even more simple issues of how men and women are different. These sorts of things can make you lose your job and can take away your platform if you are a journalist or a researcher or an academic. Now that is real silencing. But men should take comfort from, at least, from the fact that it was male ingenuity that explored the oceans, that told us about our planet. It's male imaginativeness that got us to the stars. It is men who have built most of what is best about the world. There are some instances in which... Are you all right? Do you need a lozenge? There are some instances, and the further back you go in history, many instances in which women have been treated very unjustly. Living in America today is not one of those periods in history. Living in America today, men are routinely ridiculed, bullied, derided in the media. There are structural disadvantages to being a man today. It's my contention that the pendulum has swung a little bit too far the other way, and that there are corrections necessary. And that one of the ways in which men don't have a great time is that their free speech is severely curtailed by a brand of feminism that seems to have a stranglehold on, on academia, on the media, and on politics. The last thing I'll say is there's not too much to worry about, because ultimately this poisonous, hateful, bigoted, sexist system is starting to be appreciated, and I mean that in the sense of it's being exposed to the public, and the public doesn't like it very much. They're not going to vote for candidates who sign up to this nonsense. They're not going to read books by people who spread it. This tiny, shrill, angry, broken, full of damaged people, awful, some of the worst people in the world, who insist on controlling how the rest of us live, policing our sexuality, policing our sexual relationships with others. They are a tiny, angry minority, and they are shrinking by the day. And although, yes, the feminist contingent of them represents the greatest threat to free speech in American society today, that is coming to an end. At least it is getting better. So stay the course, have faith, and let's beat feminism together.